Welcome to Kit 301 ICT Project A. In this week's online lecture, we'll be talking through the specifications for our third major assessment piece for this semester. Right now, we're going to be moving into our first Agile cycle, which is our first opportunity for design, development, testing, and feedback of our initial prototypes of our systems. Before we do that, let's figure out how we're progressing as a team going through our project so far. What we have on the left here are the grades for our initiation report. And you might remember that there was quite a spread, some in the low levels and some in the high levels. If we look at the right, however, what we're seeing, happily, is a much more strong predominance of students who are actually getting higher or very significant results in this unit. That's a really, really strong indicator of teams coming together, you starting to learn and understand your projects a little bit more clearly, and actually setting plans for moving forward. This is a really, really excellent result. If, however, your team is still down in the lower range, this means we still have some work to do, and there are lots of opportunities in this round for you to seek support, both from me, your team, and your clients. So please make sure that you do that. We want to make sure that every team is working well and producing a really high quality project and product for their client. So far, what we've done is figure out why a project is actually needed in your particular context, and also what the project will actually require, what it is we're actually going to build. Now, in this first Agile cycle, we're actually going to start doing that work. We're going to design, we're going to start prototype development, we are going to do our first testing round, and we are actually then going to get some client feedback and figure out what changes to the requirements are actually required as a result of our first prototype sets of development. With regard to the ILOs, all three of them kick in for this particular assignment. So we are both developing, we are operating as individuals, and we are making contributions as members of a team. This assignment contributes to the achievement of every one of those ILOs. As a large component, all of the components of the Agile cycle contribute 30% to your overall grade. So again, this is quite a substantive assignment that you need to pay attention to and make a very strong and active contribution to over the next 6 or 7 weeks. The Agile report itself consists of both the report proper, just as you've done in both initiation and planning, and a self and peer assessment. And these components are due in week 12. In your planning report, you hopefully have fully specified what is actually to be built. You've created use cases or documents to identify what actually your particular users need to interact with. You've possibly even started to think about what interfaces and experiences actually are going to be for your particular set of users. This Agile report relates to now the translation of those more theoretical decisions into practical design specifications for the technical build. In this report, you're going to be taking what you've created both in the initiation and planning reports and putting them into action. So this report is both the practical decision making or the examination of those practical decisions or justifications of them as you are actually creating a technical artifact. So our Agile document will include, as a minimum, a description of the initial design of the software. This means, what does it look like? What are the particular visual attributes of the system? Then a description of the progress towards the technical development of the software. Now, in the planning report, you've articulated what should actually have been completed in this first Agile cycle. What we want here is a description of what you've actually built, whether it is ahead of progress or behind progress, and an explanation as to where you were up to and why. We also then want you to engage in a user and technical testing process, and in this report you will document both the process and the outcomes of this initial testing phase. You will also provide a summary of the design and requirement changes that are required as a result of this testing and client feedback. So what that means is, once you have designed and built a prototype, you're going to work with both users and your client to identify whether it suits their needs. Based on their feedback, you're going to document what changes do you need to engage in your second Agile cycle. If in your planning report you got feedback that anything needs immediate attention, this is also the document in where you augment that. So what we're going to do every time we have an Agile report is provide you with an opportunity for updating anything that has come before. So in this Agile report, anything from initiation and planning that needs to be updated or augmented because you have new or better knowledge needs to go at the end here as well. Now, this is not, again, just a hypothetical development. This is where you actually go back and reflect on your knowledge and skills from all of the other units that you have done leading up to this capstone project. Every project management unit, every technological development unit, every HCI unit and such. A bit more detailed look at these particular components. We're going to start with the initial design of the software. Now, you'll have a designer and you'll have artists and interfaces in your team. This is where those kinds of roles really start to shine. What we want you to do as a team is actually design the system before you start to technically implement it, because we need to make sure that all of the components sit together and that they actually do provide the user experience that you have been told to design for. So how do we go about articulating the design? Well, in many units that you've done, technological development, HCI, so on, have actually described to you different ways for you to show aspects of design. What we could include in this section might be user maps, so there might be process maps, or they might be flowcharts of user activity. They could be models of how the structure of a system actually works and how things are held together or put together, or the sequence of events that somebody needs to follow. We could also have prototype or user interface design mock-ups here. We could include storyboards if narrative is a feature of your particular design. For most of you, there will be some level of either interface or artwork, and so mock-ups and prototypes of these and the development of them throughout the process should also be included. Sometimes scenarios or user cases or user stories might also feature, again, in this particular report. So what we're suggesting here is it is up to you to identify how best to show the design that you are creating for your particular system. It's entirely okay to go from very, very low-level paper designs all the way through to properly mocked-up prototypes. Showing the progression of your ideas is also really important, both for your client to understand how you got to where you got to, but it helps you justify the design choices that you're actually making. Now, it's important to notice here that this report is not just about saying that you have made decisions, but it's about justifying and substantiating those decisions. Do they in fact meet the requirements of your client and other stakeholders? If you're making particular design decisions, why are they the best ones that suit those particular users' needs? So we don't just want the presentation of an interface, we want the discussion of its design and its appropriateness to achieving the outcomes of your particular system. So because many projects are quite different from each other, I'm not specifying exactly which mechanism you need to do to actually engage in this design process. That's up to you as a team to decide what is the most appropriate. That said, however, there are common tools and technologies and practices that you can actually use to your advantage in the design phase. Take a look at some examples. In this particular set, what we have in our top right is an example of a prototype interface for a home screen on a website. You can actually see that the team has fully detailed and developed the site in a prototype version, identifying icons, color schemes, and interesting and useful information. In the middle screen, what we can see is an articulation of different attributes of following screens. They've identified this through numbering, but you can do it however you want, but you do need to describe the particular features. What isn't enough is to just show a screen. You actually have to talk to the attributes on those screens and show how they meet the particular requirements as identified in both your initiation and planning report. In the top right hand, we can actually see more screens, more prototypes of how information is going to be presented in this particular team's example. Again, articulating what dialog boxes would look like, what help and information screens would look like, what the visual aesthetic of the whole site is likely to look like. If we move to the bottom set now, what we see on the left is a characterization of how the user actually navigates through the whole system. What is their sequence of events to get from one particular point to the end of the process that they are coming to this site to achieve. Then in the center, what we have is a website structure diagram, just basically showing how all of the pages link. And then on the bottom right, we actually have a database file-based structure. So again, lots of different ways to represent data in this just one relatively simple website. So what we're looking for here is not just a mock-up of a website, but the detailed design specifications of how all of the components contribute to the outcomes of your project and how they all fit together. In this example, this is much more of a creative product as opposed to a business or website kind of product. In this example, what we can see are visual interfaces that allow users to come along and actually create drawings and animations in this package that is being created by this particular project team. So what we can see are examples of menus and examples of how users would access those menus. We also see the design of drop boxes and different kinds of example pictures that somebody might presumably interact with. So once again, this is another interesting way of showing the attributes of design and the sequence of events throughout those design. Again, we are much more interested in not just the choices that you make, but how they all link together and why they are the most suitable choices for moving your project towards achieving the goals that you identified in your initiation report. And here's another example. In this case, what we're being shown are interface designs of a game. So at the top here, what we have are examples of prototype development to get the team closer to the visual imagery that is appropriate for their title of their game. So what you can see are slight changes and improvements over time as the team learns more and tests these and tries these with their potential user base. At the left at the bottom, what we see again is a progression of icons. So we have some initial designs and then we have some designs that were actually agreed on as the final components to go through into the actual game. So again, what we're not interested in is just the final result, but also where did you start and where are you up to now? What were your decisions based on? What were changes to design based on? We're very much interested in looking at your progression of your design choices. Over on the right, what we have here is an example, again, of design. This is how all of the levels have been designed and how they are all linked and how they are all related in terms of fulfilling gameplay. So what we can see here is they are represented by different colors because they have different attributes, different characteristics, different aspects of gameplay. But they all have some features in common, and as somebody moves through the progression of the game, this actually shows their initial presumed pathway or options that they have available to them. So again, these 3 pages have shown you many different examples of how you might articulate your design. It is very important that you understand we are both interested in progression of design, the actual design choices, and the justification or substantiation of these choices in light of what your project is actually trying to achieve for your client. So once we've actually designed our system and our components and all of the attributes of our user interface and the user experience, what we want you to document next in this Agile report is how you are progressing to completing the tasks that you identified as appropriate for completion in your Agile 1 release. Now this was documented hopefully with clarity in your planning report. What we want you to do is pull that Gantt chart into this report and start talking to the achievement of each of the items. Now, given that technical development and design always changes in terms of timelines and deliverables, it's entirely okay that if you find yourself a little behind schedule or ideally even a little ahead of schedule. But what we're interested in is you articulating what has actually been done and talking to any changes that are required into the schedule as a result of what particular issues, how you've managed those issues and prevented any scope creep or time delays from actually happening. Now, you'll remember back in our initiation report, you did a risk log. What we're looking for now is to make sure that you are preventing any risks that are going to slow down progress. But if those risks turn up, for example, our COVID-19 circumstance, what are you doing to mitigate the impact of those risks on your actual technological development? So the reason we did a risk log was to get ready for this particular phase. Now that we're full on into development and on into technical design, we need to ensure that this moves ahead appropriately and according to our milestone charts. So if anything is going a little awry, this is where you document what you're trying to do to fix it, to bring it back onto schedule. So once we've designed and done some initial prototype development, now, as is normal in an agile cycle, we start to get feedback on that work. Now, in this particular report, you'll be gaining feedback from 3 sources. The first is a technical testing phase, which is you and your co-developers actually running your use cases through a testing protocol to ensure that they are working technologically as is expected. The second is to engage with a typical type set of users. Now, you should have identified them way back in your stakeholder report from your initiation report. Now is the time to engage with them where possible and get them to play around with your interfaces and your basic functionality to see how they actually interact with your system. So again, what we're looking for you to do here is set up a protocol, get access to users and run them through the scenarios that you have designed for, looking for the ways that they will interact, the things that they click, the things that they notice, the things that they miss. And then finally, we want to get some feedback from your client. What do they think about what you have created so far? Does it actually fulfill the goals and characteristics that they identified for you in your first initiation report? Are they happy with what you're creating? Does it do what they wanted it to do? What changes would they recommend you engage in your next round? Technical testing is this first part. This is where we actually identify what functionally should work in your system, as identified in your planning report for Agile Cycle 1. So what we do here is we identify what our testing protocol is. Now, there are many examples of these, and you again would have been identified or had identified these to you in perhaps your coding and project development units. So I want you to go back and find those, or in fact look online for these kinds of attributes that will help you develop a testing protocol. Now, this is technical testing. That means, does it work functionally as it is expected to work functionally according to its initial design? So what you will do is you will develop a prototype, you will identify your particular testing criteria, and this should be very much linked to your use cases that predominantly for most of you would have come out of your requirements trace matrix. You actually identified through your use cases what actually has to be developed and functionality needs to be included. This is where you can test whether that's actually happened appropriately or not. What we want after the tests is an analysis, reflection, and summary of results. So what does that mean? That means, well, what were the outcomes of your testing process? And here it's entirely okay to identify if things were completely okay, if they met some of the requirements, or in fact they did not pass at all. Well, all this does is allows us or identifies areas that we need to do some further work in making sure that those particular requirements are in fact achieved. So we want to know what are the outcomes, but what does this then mean for the future work? If some things failed, that means we're actually going to have to do some augmentation on those in our next Agile cycle. So those tasks have to be moved towards the next cycle. So the question here is, what does this mean for your future work as a team and your existing Gantt charts? What augmentations and changes have to be now made to fix the particular things that have been identified as potentially problematic in your testing phase? What we see here as an example is simply a representation of one team's protocol, one dimension only. So for example, they say here that users can edit the current homepage and go back to the homepage list. So what is the criteria that somebody has to use, and how did they actually test it, and did it actually pass or not? So technical testing is quite a common process, and there are many examples out there that will assist you in documenting this particular process in your own example. In terms of representing your user testing, it's somewhat similar in so much as what we want is a description of your methodology, the description of the criteria included in your user testing, and the outcomes and changes that are required as a result of those particular evaluations. Again, user testing can be undertaken in many ways, through observation, through getting them to play and give you written feedback, or setting up a particular criteria and just identifying whether they have been able to fulfill particular functions. Again, the particular methodology is up to your team to decide, given that your project is quite unique and different from others. I have here a couple of examples of how these have been represented in the past, however. And what we can see from this first set of columns is that use cases that have been identified previously in the planning report have been brought over into a visual representation. And what we can see is some of the user stories have already been included in this testing regime in Agile Cycle 1. What we can see from the green one is that a full user story was actually tested, and that it has met all of its specifications, and the orange indicates that some of the criteria have actually been tested and passed, and yet other attributes of that use case are still to be tested. Now, once we have linkages, or again, traceability back to those particular user cases, we can actually have an articulation of the actual test that was performed, who did what in that test, and the outcomes of that particular test. Did it pass? Is there still work to be done? And then what changes happen as a result? On the right-hand columns, we have something quite similar, but at quite a different representation. What we see here are, again, the identification or specifications of the requirements that were set out in your planning report. Then what we have is a matrix that traces both the requirement from the planning report and the task that was given to users in the user testing protocol. And then what we can see in the lower diagram here is whether they have actually met particular requirements or times that it took to actually complete a particular task. So this second set is actually measuring success based on the time it takes to complete a particular task, whereas the first one is not based on time at all. And so it's entirely up to you and your team, again, to identify what your criteria is, what your testing methodology or protocol is, but then to fully document and explain what came out of this and what you're going to do as a result. And to finish off this feedback section, what we also then want is a summary of the design and development requirement changes that have come about as a result of all of this testing and client feedback. What we want you to do is think about, given what you know now that you didn't know before, what actually has to be fixed or changed to allow your development and design to continue into Agile 2. Now, in your planning report, you very clearly, hopefully, articulated what had to be designed and developed by the end of Agile 1. Now that you've done that, I want you to compare that list or that Gantt chart with what has actually happened now and what it will look like into the future. So this is why I suggested very strongly that you use Gantt charts so that we can have a comparative analysis in this particular report. So what I want you to do is get your planning report Agile 1 Gantt chart and compare it to the upcoming planning 2 Agile changes that are required as a result of any of this testing, protocol feedback and client feedback. We are now getting ready at the end of this cycle for the second one, and we need to augment things appropriately as a result of what we know at the end of Agile 1, which we didn't beforehand. As we have done with every other assignment, we will also be doing a self-assessment. Please make sure that you fill in this with a lot of detail so that both myself, your client, and your peers will able to identify the major contributions that you have been responsible for throughout this last cycle. This is a very heavy cycle in a whole range of different areas, and every single member must now make a very strong and active contribution. Otherwise, you simply will not get your product completed on time. Please ensure that you use the most up-to-date template that is available on Milo, as this is a different cycle and therefore has different tasks that you should show engagement in. So please make sure that you get the Agile Cycle 1 template rather than other ones that look very similar that we've used in previous reports. All of these are available on Milo for you. As we have done with every other assignment, we will also be doing a self-assessment. Please make sure that you fill in this with a lot of detail so that both myself, your client, and your peers will able to identify the major contributions that you have been responsible for throughout this last cycle. This is a very heavy cycle in a whole range of different areas, and every single member must now make a very strong and active contribution. Otherwise, you simply will not get your product completed on time. Please ensure that you use the most up-to-date template that is available on Milo, as this is a different cycle and therefore has different tasks that you should show engagement in. So please make sure that you get the Agile Cycle 1 template rather than other ones that look very similar that we've used in previous reports. All of these are available on Milo for you. And once again, we are also going to engage in a peer assessment. This is the third and last opportunity for team members to be assessed by their peers and to have their contributions valued and articulated by people who have an experience in working with them. So once again, we are very much interested in not just statements that suggest everybody was perfect and wonderful, but we are actually looking for ways that we can help our peers or help our teammates improve so that the overall results of the team and the output for the client meet the highest level of professional output as possible. As we have done in the previous both initiation and planning rounds, it's entirely okay for you to get feedback on your documents. When you are ready, at about 80%, and your entire team has read and proofread your submission, I'd like you to send me an email and organize a time that we can sit down and review your particular document. Again, because you haven't actually done one of these before, it would be foolhardy not to get feedback before you go through the process of submission. So close to the submission date, when you have done substantive amounts of work, please make an appointment with me to review. Please also note, however, that given that there are at least 20 teams, I don't have an opportunity to offer this service more than once to each team. So please make the best use of it. Only make an appointment when you have a full, complete draft that all of your team are happy as representing almost final version. In addition to the Agile report and the self and peer review, there are two other assessment components that are due in the upcoming weeks, and these are two software demonstrations. In week 10 and in week 13, you will be required to show me a working prototype of your system. In week 10, it will be what you have been able to create in the first 3 weeks, giving me some insight into your functionality and your prototype development. And this will be then shown again to me in week 13 to see what kind of additional development and structure you have been able to build into your technical development. This ensures that you are actually creating an artifact that is of an appropriate level for a prototype that meets the specifications of your client, so that I get to see it and give you feedback on it as you actually progress the process. This relates specifically to ILO 1, where you exhibit skills in the design and development of a technical system that meets user needs, applies a user-centered approach, and adheres to professional standards. So what we're looking for here is not some random bits and pieces thrown together. You're actually appropriately structuring and designing a system and putting prototype elements together that a potential user can see some design and functionality and figure out how the system might actually work for them. These individually contribute 5% each, so the software demonstrations in semester 1 will be 10%. The first will be in the week 10 management meeting, and the second will be in the week 13 management meeting. These are only to be 5 minutes each, not longer than that. 5 minutes should be substantial enough. Your team will undertake a demonstration of the software that shows me examples of the interfaces, examples of the functionality, and discussing whether it is consistent or otherwise with the outcomes of the initiation and the planning documents, how it meets the needs of your client and associated stakeholders. Please note, you do not have to prepare any slides for this. You simply need to find a way of showing me these attributes of your system in a real functional way. So, given that we are operating online right now, what you can do is, if you are developing it on your own machines, you can actually just in the Zoom, you can actually screen share and show me how it might work from your machine. If that is not functional or feasible, what you can do is pre-record a small demonstration and send that to me that we can work through together in our management meeting. So if you can't do a live demo through Zoom, please pre-record at least the first one so we can see how that works, and then I will be able to give you some feedback both on the design of the interfaces, the navigation, and the technical development as you progress. Please note that these are very, very important components that contribute to the achievement of ILO 1. So, how do we start this large process? This Agile cycle will go for the next few weeks and take us to the end of semester. So you have quite a period of time, but similarly you have quite a lot of things to do. So let's get started on that. Firstly, I want you to revise and review your planning report. If you got a good mark and you think it is an appropriate thing to give to your client in its current version, please do that. If you think there are some concerns about style, structure, or content, please fix those and then send that version to your client, as they will require this. What I would like you to do is reflect on both your group and your individual feedback from your planning report. Are there any either group or individual areas for improvement? This is the last opportunity you have to show improvement in this unit. And if we don't see achievement of these learning objects, you will not be allowed into the second semester version to complete this project. So this is the last opportunity to improve and show improvement and have that improvement reflected by your peers. So if things have been identified as needing additional work, you must absolutely improve on those immediately. If you need help or advice, please make contact with me. What you need to also do is now revise your technical development units for things that will assist you in the design in terms of maps, models, prototyping, HCI, navigation, accessibility, all of those different kinds of attributes that contribute to the design of a system. I also want you to review your technical development units. What is best practice software development in an Agile frame? How are you going to ensure that you are meeting best practice principles? And then I want you to review and revise protocols and processes for undertaking both user and technical testing, and develop protocols and processes along that line as well. So in the early weeks, there's still a lot of decision making to be done, and every member of the team is expected to show an active contribution in many of these different areas. This is where the technological development really hits the road, so a lot of work to be done. If you have any questions, please let me know. Set up a Zoom meet or just send me an email. Other than that, good luck, happy building. I'll be very much looking forward to seeing your first prototype in week 12.